Blue skies, birds alive, in Texas, there's a lot of flies. As you can already tell, I'm not cut up to be a poet. But, on another note, filmmaking is a huge part of my life now, and I don't intend on leaving it anytime soon. Being a creative is a process of learning every time you pick up the camera, and so... Summer is almost over. That means fall is around the corner. Which officially means now that I graduated college 2 months ago for my film degree. And now I'm here to see if I really learned anything. And to tell you guys how to somewhat look cinematic with the basics that I know. Many say that a film degree is not needed, but I'm glad that I do have one. I'm not going to lie, but let's start with the gear. Shall we? So, college taught me that a camera is our tool as creatives to tell a story or your story. To me, gear does matter, but up to a certain point. I mean, if I could have all the gear in the world, that would be a dream come true, right? But it doesn't make me a better creator, does it? When I started my journey in documenting my life, it was kind of like this. Not knowing what framing was, how composition can affect your story or mood. And it was because, just like all the YouTubers say, just press record and start. But to me, now I can understand that it's so much more than that. A lot of thinking and learning goes behind that. I've recently been diving deeper on how to craft a better product of a video. And there's a question I always like to ask myself before picking up the camera, which is, am I recording myself or am I making a video? That is why, to me, camera gear or camera equipment matters, but only up to a certain point. If you see my first few videos, you can tell that I was just recording myself rather than making a video. Now, in terms of the gear, I did start my first videos with this DJI Osmo Pocket, which is actually pretty cool. Turns on like that. And pretty much this camera shoots 4K or 1080p at 25 frames per second, which is roughly 24. It shoots 30 frames per second, and it can go up to 60 frames per second as well. Same thing with the iPhone. But look how cool this one is. It's pretty much like a drone camera, but in your hands, which is pretty cool. And I started with that little guy, also with the GoPro, but the videos weren't as good because I wasn't making a video. I was just grabbing it, pressing record, and just going with the flow. And same thing with this little guy. This is the iPhone 11, and it can also shoot 4K at 24 frames per second, 30 and 60 frames per second, which is enough for what you need, for what beginner creators need. I remember I had started making gym videos on TikTok back in 2021 with just using my phone. And some of those videos reached over 100,000 views, which is crazy. But right after I bought my first camera, which is the Sony a7C, all of my views went down. Although, of course, the quality was much better, but that just teaches us that sometimes the simpler, the better. Sometimes. Anyways, just wanted to speak about that. Now, I'm gonna call Dimitri. Hey, bro, you got anything today?
Nothing much, what?
Alright. Hey, you ready to ball?
Yeah.
Yeah. Alright, let's go. Alright. We're here at the basketball court already. You already know. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I see it like this. If you're shooting at 24 frames per second, then you have less still images in that video, which creates that rawness and natural look into your video, aka the motion blur. They say that shooting at 24 frames per second is the movie standards for being cinematic. You know that? But if you're shooting at 60 frames per second, then you have more still images in that image, which can have this less realistic look, but it'll be flexible enough so it can be maneuvered for you to slow it down in post without having it look all choppy. If you have a really high shutter speed, you will get a much more sharper image. Usually in the sports industry, because of all the quick movements, they tend to use a high shutter speed so all the movement can look as clean as possible without having much blurriness. Hey bro, can you pass me the ball? Whoa, I'm seeing birds right now. When the shutter speed is as low, it can help by creating a confused or disoriented look. A low shutter speed can hands down give your videos a whole different feel. I feel like I'm falling. Yep, I'm falling. Lighting plays a huge part in filmmaking. I think it's one of the most important parts in filmmaking. I believe it's even more important than the camera itself, because by lighting, you can't tell a story. What I like to use a lot is this atmospheric mist and a sprayed can that I bought not so long ago on Amazon. This mist allows me to soften all the lights in the room or the lighting that I do use. And it also just adds a little more stylistic look to your footage. Having the main subject in front of the main source of light and having your camera on the side of the subject has a more cinematic look to it, especially for your B-roll shots. A trick that I found recently on Instagram is to follow your hand and see where that perfectly shadow and light falls into. And that's where your subject should be. And also, if you do have the main source of light behind you, a good way is to have a really bright light in front of your subject, which in filmmaking we like to call the key light. The other side is going to be a little bit too dark because there's going to be a lot of shadows and contrast. Now enters the fill light, what kind of looks like this. All in all, I believe that filmmaking is a way that we can express ourselves and tell our story, like I said in the beginning. Just a little bit of more information about how to make your videos a little bit more cinematic is picking the right lens. The most recommended lenses or used lenses in the cinematography business or in productions are the 35mm, the 50mm, and the 85mm. And the reason being is because they all have a different look. The 35 is the perfect medium. The 50 is the just right for the OTSs, which means a dialogue or over the shoulder, or if you're gonna get something up close, but you don't want it to look too close, just as the 85. And the 85 is just I call it a delicious lens because you can get really creative with the 85, even though it's a little tighter and reaches farther, but you can have more bokeh in your footage. And if you don't know what bokeh is, pretty much what, the blurriness outside of the character, outside of your subject. Speaking of bokeh, another thing that we should focus on also is our f-stop or aperture, however you want to call it. The lower it is, let's say it's a f.2.8, the lower, or f1.8, the lower it is, the more bokeh or blurriness you're gonna have around your subject. Now if it's higher, 5.6, f11, whatever it is, this camera or this lens goes up to f22. Now, the higher it is, the little window of the lens closes, which brings less light into the lens or the camera sensor, but more things are in focus, which means you're gonna have less bokeh in that subject. Now, if it's open or lower, like f1.8 or 2.8, the more light is gonna come into the sensor. You're gonna have to play with your settings there. That's pretty much what filmmaking is. Getting creative and learning why you want to use that lens or why you want to use that composition or that framing, and sometimes doing it wrong makes it look cool, or doing it right looks pretty simple or bland. That's what pretty much all the filmmakers know or do. They know the rules to break them. One of the things that I like to focus on a lot is grid lines and composition or rule of thirds. Composition or rule of thirds basically means just having that little cross or hashtag on your camera, so that way you know where your subject is going to be, or your product, and all that good stuff. Pretty much being able to put it on the grid line just makes it so much more cinematic. Now if I were symmetrical like this, I have it on right now, and if I were exactly in the center, that grid line is on my eyes right now, and it looks pretty symmetrical, everything's even, and it looks really cool. So I motivate you and dare you to put all this in practice, or start with something and just keep developing your skill. Now, with that being said, if you haven't seen any of my other videos, just watch this one right here, and see you on the next one.
The space unraveled.